Sarah Williams was the life of every party, loved by everyone, except for Jenna, her obsessed former friend, who would stop at nothing to get what she wanted. Luke Carter, Sarah's boyfriend, had always been caught between them, but when the prom night took a dark turn, he found himself frozen in the shadows. What began as a simple argument soon spiraled into a deadly confrontation, and one of them would never leave the woods alive. The night was alive with excitement as Pine Valley. High school's annual prom kicked off in the transformed gymnasium. The gym was bathed in a soft, warm glow from the twinkling fairy lights that hung from the ceiling, casting delicate shadows on the polished wooden floors. Balloons floated around the room, and tables were decorated with sparkling centerpieces. The music played loud, but it was the laughter and chatter of the students that filled the air, bouncing off the walls. Dresses of every color swirled across the floor as tuxedos and gowns spun to the rhythm of the DJ's beats. For the students of Pine Valley, this was the moment they had waited for all year, a night to make memories that would last a lifetime. Sarah Williams stood near the center of the room, a stunning vision in a deep red dress that shimmered with each step she took. Her smile was wide, her eyes bright with the joy of the night. She was surrounded by her friends, each one radiating the same youthful energy. They laughed and danced, carefree and unaware that this night, so full of promise, would soon turn into a nightmare none of them could have imagined. Sarah had always been the life of the party. Outgoing, charismatic, and loved by all, she had a natural way of making everyone around her feel important. That night, she was on top of the world, feeling the thrill of being surrounded by friends and the excitement of her senior year winding down. Her boyfriend, Luke Carter, was by her side, a charming but mysterious figure. Luke wasn't as popular as Sarah, but he had a quiet confidence that drew people in. He and Sarah had been together on and off for the past year, and while their relationship was filled with passion, it was also full of ups and downs. They fought often, but something about their bond seemed to hold them together through it all. As the night unfolded, the two drifted in and out of the crowd, occasionally disappearing into quieter corners of the gym for a brief moment of solitude. Luke wasn't the type to revel in the spotlight like Sarah did, but when he was with her, he didn't mind being close by. However, a tension began to grow between them as the night wore on. Small disagreements had been building for weeks, jealousy, misunderstandings, unresolved feelings that had been bubbling beneath the surface of their relationship. That night, it all came to a head. Around 10:30 p.m., just as the music shifted to a slower song, Sarah and Luke were seen arguing by a group of their friends. It wasn't unusual for them to have a tense moment here and there, but the fight this time seemed different. The usual banter and light teasing had escalated into something more serious. Sarah looked visibly upset, and Luke's face was dark, his jaw clenched in frustration. For a brief moment they paused, as if trying to calm down, but the tension in the air was palpable. After a few moments, Sarah turned and walked away, her heels clicking sharply on the floor as she headed toward the exit. Luke watched her go, but instead of following her, he stayed behind, staring at the ground, lost in thought. Their friends didn't think much of it at first. It was just another one of their arguments, they assumed. But something about the way Sarah left, the way she stormed off without a word, didn't sit right. By midnight, the gym was quieter. The laughter had died down, and the dance floor was less crowded. People were starting to leave, but Sarah was nowhere to be seen. No one had noticed her slip out, and as the night came to a close, her absence went unnoticed by all but a few. But when Sarah's friends looked around and realized she wasn't with them, panic began to set in. They tried calling her phone, but it went straight to voicemail. A few of them decided to search the surrounding areas around the school, but there was no sign of her. No one had seen her leave with Luke. The only thing they knew for sure was that she was gone. The prom had ended, but for Sarah's friends and family, the night was far from over. The question on everyone's mind was simple. Where was she? The morning after prom, Pine Valley was still and quiet, the aftermath of the night's excitement lingering in the empty streets. The town, known for its sleepy charm and tight-knit community, was not used to this kind of turmoil. News spread quickly that Sarah Williams, the popular and beloved senior, was missing. Her friends, initially thinking she might have just stayed over at a friend's house, quickly realized something was terribly wrong. Sarah hadn't come home, and her phone calls went unanswered. What started as a small concern snowballed into a full-blown panic. Sarah's mother, Carol, was beside herself with worry. She had waited up for Sarah the night before, but when the morning came and her daughter still hadn't returned, a sense of dread began to settle in. By mid-morning, Carol reached out to Sarah's friends. They were just as confused, not having seen or heard from her since the argument at prom. The last time any of them had seen Sarah, she had been walking out of the gym alone, visibly upset. Police were called to the Williams household, and the small town's serene atmosphere quickly turned into a hive of activity. Officers began their search, first checking the school grounds, and then expanding outward into the nearby woods and trails. The town's residents, who had always been on friendly terms with one another, now found themselves on edge, trying to make sense of the unsettling situation. People who had never before been involved in search parties or police matters were now on foot, knocking on doors, asking neighbors if they had seen anything out of the ordinary. Despite the coordinated search efforts, there was no sign of Sarah. No one had seen her leave with anyone, and the security footage from the gym only showed her walking away alone. Luke, Sarah's boyfriend, was nowhere to be found. The authorities tried to reach him, but his phone was off, and no one had seen him since the argument. It was starting to look like he might be connected to her disappearance. The thought was unsettling. Luke wasn't known to be violent, but the tension between him and Sarah that night was undeniable. As hours passed without any new leads, the police expanded their investigation. They interviewed everyone who had been at prom, including Sarah's friends, who gave conflicting accounts of the argument. Some had seen them fighting, others hadn't. But all of them agreed that it didn't seem serious. It wasn't the kind of fight that would lead to something like this. Still, something didn't add up. Sarah was no runaway. She wouldn't have just disappeared without a trace, not without telling someone, not without her things. Luke's absence was growing more suspicious by the hour. Detectives managed to track down his parents, who said that Luke hadn't come home since the night of prom. His car was missing, and no one had heard from him. It seemed like Luke had vanished into thin air, just like Sarah. The connection between the two, the argument, and the strange disappearance was becoming too difficult to ignore. There were too many unanswered questions. Why hadn't anyone seen them leave together? Where had Luke gone? And most importantly, where was Sarah? As the hours turned into a full day, panic turned into frustration. With each passing hour, the hope of finding Sarah alive seemed to dwindle. The community was shaken. Pine Valley was a town where everyone knew everyone else, where the worst things that ever happened were minor accidents or petty arguments. This was different. This was something darker, something no one could have predicted. The search for Sarah Williams had become the town's nightmare. and no one was prepared for the shocking truth that was about to unfold. 4 days after Sarah's disappearance, the search had grown desperate. The entire town of Pine Valley, once peaceful and untouched by the horrors of the outside world, was gripped by fear. The woods surrounding the town were combed by search parties, and volunteers worked tirelessly day and night, hoping for a breakthrough. But with each passing day, hope was slipping away. The authorities had no solid leads, and the community was beginning to accept the harsh possibility that Sarah might never come home. Then, on the 4th day, everything changed. A group of hikers, who had been traversing the wooded area near the outskirts of Pine Valley, stumbled upon something unusual. It was a small clearing, overgrown with weeds, and there, buried beneath a pile of leaves and dirt, was a discarded purse. The hikers immediately called the police. The purse, once belonging to Sarah, was a clear sign that something had gone terribly wrong. It was found in an area that hadn't been searched thoroughly before, and the discovery prompted a renewed, frantic search. The authorities arrived at the site, and as they began to sift through the dirt and debris, they uncovered more of Sarah's belongings: her phone, some scattered papers, and a broken bracelet. It seemed as if someone had been in a hurry to hide them. The objects were all mixed together in a way that suggested they had been discarded hastily, without thought to their careful placement. The purse, in particular, showed signs of being dragged across the ground, leaving a trail in the dirt. As the searches continued, one of the officers stumbled upon something even more chilling. Just a few yards away from the purse, partially, hidden by overgrown grass and leaves, was a shallow grave. The officer's heart raced as he realized what he had found. Kneeling down, he carefully removed the earth covering the body beneath. It was Sarah. Her body was cold and stiff, as if it had been there for days, but there was no sign of violent trauma, no obvious injuries. The scene was eerily calm, the surrounding forest silent except for the soft rustling of leaves in the breeze. It was clear that Sarah had been murdered, but the cause of death wasn't immediately apparent. There was no blood at the scene, no weapon in sight. It was as if the killer had been meticulous, trying to erase any trace of what had happened. The discovery of Sarah's body sent shockwaves through the town. For days, the community had been filled with uncertainty, but now that uncertainty had turned into a grim reality. Sarah was dead. The peace that had once defined Pine Valley had been shattered. Detectives immediately began to investigate the scene, combing for forensic evidence, but the absence of obvious signs of violence made the investigation even more complicated. The lack of blood or any clear injury raised more questions than answers. Had Sarah been suffocated? Poisoned? The detectives weren't sure, and it seemed like the more they looked, the fewer answers they found. As news of the discovery spread, the town was left in a state of shock. The local police focused on Sarah's circle of friends and family, but the most glaring lead was the disappearance of Luke Carter. He was the last person seen with her, and his absence was now a source of growing suspicion. Friends had confirmed that the couple had been fighting, but no one had ever imagined that it would lead to something like this. What had happened in those final moments before Sarah left the prom? Was Luke involved in her death, or was there someone else, someone more dangerous, lurking in the shadows? The investigation was far from over, but one thing was clear. Pine Valley would never be the same. The townspeople who had once felt safe in their peaceful existence now found themselves grappling with the reality that darkness had come to their doorstep. The search for answers was just beginning, and no one knew where it would lead. As the investigation deepened, the police found themselves standing at the crossroads of a troubling and complex case. The discovery of Sarah's body had confirmed what everyone feared. She had been murdered. Yet as the days passed, the mystery surrounding her death only deepened. There were no signs of a struggle, no immediate clues as to how she had died. The absence of any obvious injury or cause of death was baffling. Had Sarah been suffocated? Poisoned? The lack of evidence left the police scrambling for answers. The first major lead was Luke Carter, Sarah's boyfriend. The last person to be seen with her, Luke had vanished without a trace on the night of the prom. His car was missing, and no one had heard from him. His phone had gone silent, and all attempts to reach him failed. Luke's disappearance seemed too coincidental, and the authorities couldn't ignore the growing suspicion that he might have had something to do with Sarah's death. Detectives began combing through Luke's past, trying to piece together a picture of his life. What they uncovered only made things more disturbing. Luke had a history of volatile behavior. There were incidents at school where he had been involved in heated arguments, sometimes turning physical. He was known to have a short temper, and his relationship with Sarah, while filled with passionate moments, was also marked by frequent fighting. Friends of the couple spoke of jealous outbursts, secretive behavior, and a strained dynamic that had been building for months. The closer the police looked, the more it became clear that Luke's relationship with Sarah wasn't as perfect as it appeared on the surface. But the more they dug into Luke's life, the more they realized that his relationship with Sarah wasn't the only mystery. There was something darker lurking beneath the surface of Luke's past. A few years earlier, Luke had been involved in a minor altercation at a party, an event that had been brushed off by most as a drunken mistake. But as detectives reviewed the details, they found that there were things Luke had never shared with anyone, things that painted a picture of a young man struggling with deep emotional and psychological issues. Anger, insecurity, and a deep sense of isolation had consumed him, and Sarah had unknowingly become the target of that unresolved turmoil. It was the discovery of a chilling text message sent from Luke's phone that gave the investigation its first real breakthrough. Sent just hours after Sarah went missing, the message was sent to an unknown recipient. The message read simply, "It's done. Don't tell anyone." The chilling brevity of the text raised several questions. Was Luke confessing to what had happened? Or was there something more sinister at play? The detectives traced the number to a local woman named Jenna, a former friend of Luke's who had recently moved away from Pine Valley. When Jenna was located, her story seemed to hold contradictions. She claimed she had been out of town on the night of Sarah's disappearance, but her alibi didn't check out. Phone records placed her in Pine Valley the night Sarah went missing, and a local bar owner confirmed she had been seen talking to Luke near the woods hours before Sarah's body was found. Jenna's involvement seemed like more than a coincidence. As the investigation shifted to focus on Jenna, new information began to surface. Jenna had been a friend of Luke's for years, but the friendship had soured after she became fixated on him. It appeared that Jenna had never gotten over her feelings for Luke, even after he started dating Sarah. She had grown increasingly obsessed with him, harboring feelings of jealousy and resentment towards Sarah, who she saw as an obstacle in her desire to be with Luke. The detectives' team now theorized that Sarah's murder had been a planned act of jealousy, a twisted crime fueled by rage and obsession. Jenna had clearly played a role in the events that night, but what exactly had transpired between her, Luke, and Sarah remained unclear. Had Luke been a passive participant, too scared to stop Jenna, or had he been actively involved? The answer wasn't clear yet, but one thing was certain. There was more to the story than just a simple argument. The tangled web of emotions, lies, and betrayals was growing more complicated by the day. and it was clear that Sarah's tragic death was not a simple case of a wronged lover. Something far darker had been at play. The investigation was reaching its peak, and the truth about what happened on the night of prom was beginning to take shape. But there was still one more shocking twist waiting to unfold, one that would change everything. The investigation into Sarah Williams' murder had become a labyrinth of lies, jealousy, and secrets. As the pieces of the puzzle slowly began to fall into place, the detectives realized they were dealing with more than just a tragic crime of passion. The truth was far more complex and disturbing than anyone could have anticipated. After weeks of interviews, research, and analysis, the breakthrough came when the police were able to confirm that Jenna had indeed been involved in Sarah's murder. The more the detectives learned about her relationship with Luke, the clearer it became that Jenna had been driven by obsessive jealousy. She hadn't just lost touch with reality. She had built a dangerous fantasy around her relationship with Luke, a fantasy in which Sarah's presence was an obstacle to her ultimate goal of being with him. It wasn't just that Jenna had a crush on Luke. It was a deep, consuming fixation that had grown over time. Even after Luke had started dating Sarah, Jenna couldn't let go of her feelings for him. She resented Sarah, seeing her as someone who had stolen Luke away, and the more she fixated on this, the more she grew to hate Sarah. For months, she had quietly plotted how to get rid of the one person who stood between her and Luke. On the night of the prom, Jenna had arrived at the venue uninvited. She had kept a low profile, not drawing attention to herself, but she was there, lurking in the background, watching the couple as they danced and argued. It was clear that Luke and Sarah's relationship was strained, and Jenna used this as an opportunity to strike. She knew that if she could just separate them, if she could just get Sarah out of the picture, she might have a chance with Luke.